The truth about my daughter-in-law, a woman I had starved to help, was brutally delivered by a grocery store cashier, and the sheer audacity of her deceit tore my heart to shreds. I am Eleanor Vance, a widow pushing 70, living an existence meticulously measured by the scarce dollars of my pension. Every single day, my primary focus is not my comfort, but maintaining the fractured peace and happiness of my only son, Ethan. For years, my life has been a silent ledger of sacrifices. Small, necessary surrenders of my own needs for the sake of the people I love. Today was supposed to be a quiet, reflective day. I was at the local superstore, holding my breath as I searched for the ingredients for a shepherd's pie, Ethan's comfort food. He was coming over for dinner, and I had exactly $38 left until the 1st of next month. Every item from the lean ground beef to the single onion was a calculation, a tiny victory over poverty. As I placed my meager items on the checkout conveyor belt, my gaze fixed on the digital display counting up the cents. George, the cashier, a man in his late 60s who always wore a slightly faded name tag, was scanning my goods. Suddenly his movements paused. He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that was deeply unsettling, then quickly darted to my tired, worn hands, where I clutched a crumpled $5 bill. Before I could speak, he leaned over the counter, his voice a low, urgent rasp that sent a chill through me. He didn't just speak. He imparted a venomous secret that stopped my breath in my throat. "Mrs. Vance," he whispered, his grip momentarily tightening on the edge of the register. "I see you here every week, counting every penny. You need to know, your son's wife and her family are not what they seem. They are living a lie, and they're using him." His words struck me with the force of an avalanche. My ears roared. He straightened up immediately, handing me my change with a mechanical movement, as if the moment of terrifying intimacy had never occurred. I took the receipt, my hands shaking so badly the paper was instantly crumpled. I couldn't look at the meat, the onion, or George. I walked out, not toward Ethan's car in the main lot, but through the back fire exit, desperate for a pocket of silence to process the sheer terror of betrayal. I ducked behind a row of large, commercial dumpsters, the sour stench of decaying food grounding me in the raw, ugly reality of the moment. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, irregular drumbeat. Was this possible? Was the kindness of my son, the very foundation of his marriage, being exploited? I decided to wait. If George's whisper held any truth, I would know it soon. The back exit was a perfect vantage point. My son Ethan is 40. He's a good man, steady and true, the kind of man who believes in the best of people. He married Veronica 3 years ago. From the start, I had reservations. She seemed to possess a certain cold ambition, but I dismissed it as youthful drive. Her father, Randall, a man who always wore the mask of humble piety, was the most persistent voice in their chorus of need. Every few weeks, it was a new crisis. A sudden car repair, a vital but uninsured dental procedure for his wife, or most frequently, a heartbreaking shortage of funds for Veronica's small business inventory. And every time, Ethan, with his deep well of kindness, would find a way to help, often sacrificing his own savings or taking on extra overtime. I too had contributed. I remember the pain of giving Veronica $200, money I had earmarked for a much-needed prescription for my chronic arthritis, because she sobbed on the phone about her father's urgent, life-saving medication. I had made that sacrifice with a full heart, believing I was protecting the happiness of my son's new family. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the main entrance. It was Randall. My muscles tightened. He wasn't carrying standard supermarket bags. He held 2 massive, glossy sacks marked with the stylized cursive logo of Gourmet Delights, a boutique wine and cheese shop across town. A place where a single bottle of wine costs more than my weekly food budget. He carried them with a casual air of entitlement. My gaze followed him. He walked straight past the rows of old, sensible vehicles and approached a gleaming, charcoal-gray luxury sedan parked conspicuously close to the door. It was brand new, the dark paint reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror, and the tires still had that fresh, expensive sheen. This was not the battered 10-year-old minivan he always used when coming to visit Ethan to borrow money. I watched him with a chilling, detached horror as he opened the trunk, a mechanized, quiet whir that spoke of high technology and cost, and carefully laid the luxury bags inside. He then leaned against the car, pulled out a sleek smartphone, and started a conversation. His posture was relaxed, confident, and utterly devoid of the stress that accompanies genuine financial worry. He was, to all appearances, a man of considerable, effortless wealth. The memory of Ethan's tired eyes after 3 weeks of double shifts to cover Randall's latest emergency slammed into me. The contrast was a physical blow. The expensive wine bags, the pristine luxury car, Randall's smug composure, it all screamed a lie so grand and audacious it was sickening. As Randall finished his call and walked back toward the store entrance, his eyes did a slow, meticulous sweep of the parking lot. His caution was unnerving, the move of a man protecting a secret, not a desperate one seeking groceries. I hugged the shadows. I needed more. The circumstantial evidence was damning, but it was not the irrefutable proof Ethan would need to believe the impossible. My phone vibrated. Ethan, Mom, you okay? Did they run out of the shepherd's pie ingredients? A simple, worried message that felt like a knife twist. I quickly texted back, blaming a sudden, enormous line at the deli counter. I couldn't leave yet. Not when the air was thick with unspoken treachery. While I waited, a couple of impeccably dressed older women strolled past, their shopping carts laden with overflowing produce. They were chatting loudly. Did you hear about Veronica's new hobby? One woman with diamond studs in her ears murmured. Another $500 class. And that new coat? I saw one just like it at the Avenue Boutique. Easily over $200. Oh, Agnes, you know how they are, the other woman replied with a knowing chuckle. Always crying poor mouth to the in-laws, yet my nephew works at the yacht club, and he says Randall is a regular. He tipped him $50 just last Saturday for fetching his car. Tipping $50 while begging for rent money? The hypocrisy is stunning. The puzzle pieces were flying together, sharp and cruel. The same Veronica who cried about lacking basic food. The same Randall who couldn't afford a trip to the dentist. They were not victims of circumstance. They were orchestrators of a calculated scam. A wave of intense nausea hit me. I had given up my medication. Ethan had sacrificed his peace. All for a family that tipped $50 and wore $200 coats. The shame of my naivety was almost unbearable. Randall reemerged from the store, this time holding a single bottle of sparkling water. He stopped near a car parked adjacent to the dumpsters, not his luxury sedan, but a dusty old Toyota. He spoke briefly to the driver, a younger man in a uniform. Randall's demeanor was patronizing, his air one of casual authority. Then I saw him discreetly slide the driver a single folded bill, a clear gesture of dominance and ease. Another tip. Another unnecessary expenditure. The man who claimed destitution was tossing cash around like confetti. The evidence was now overwhelming, but it was all my evidence, based on overheard gossip and secret observation. It wouldn't hold up against a lifetime of emotional manipulation built on Ethan's trust. I had to leave. I couldn't risk Ethan coming to look for me. I composed my face, smoothing the panic and fury into a mask of mild exhaustion. I walked back toward the main parking lot toward Ethan, carrying my pathetic bag of discounted groceries. As I got into the car, Ethan immediately frowned. Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost. What took so long? The checkout line was impossibly slow, dear. I lied, the words tasting like ash. Just the Saturday rush. Ethan started the engine, pulling out of the lot. The silence was heavy. I glanced at the side mirror. Randall's luxury sedan was still there, but the man himself was gone. How's Randall's new consulting job going? I asked, testing the waters. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. He's had to cut back the hours, Mom. The company is having trouble. That's why Veronica asked for the extra help this week. I feel so bad for them. Cut back hours. The phrase sounded so honest, so sacrificial. Yet, just minutes ago, the man who supposedly couldn't work was buying $500 worth of gourmet goods. And you, son? I pressed gently. You look exhausted. You've been working too much overtime for them lately. They're family now, Mom, he said. The exhaustion in his voice mixed with a tired resignation. Veronica is my wife. When they hurt, I hurt. I have to help. His unwavering belief, his exhausted loyalty to a lie, solidified my resolve. I couldn't just tell him. I had to show him the cold, hard, damning evidence. I needed a concrete weapon against the fortress of his trust. We arrived at the Willow Creek neighborhood, where Veronica's parents lived. It wasn't the most exclusive area of the city, but it was certainly not the address of a family struggling to pay for basic necessities. The houses were large, with immaculately manicured lawns and fresh, vibrant paint. As Ethan searched for a parking spot, I took in the sight of Randall's house. It was a stately two-story structure, recently upgraded with new windows and an imposing mahogany front door. Their house looks wonderful, Ethan, I commented, my tone flat, devoid of emotion. Didn't Veronica mention they were delaying repairs because money was so tight? Oh, well, Randall managed to land a few small cash-only jobs on the weekends, Ethan explained as he parked the car. He's been working tirelessly to keep the house from falling apart. He's very dedicated to keeping up appearances. Appearances. The word stung, perfectly encapsulating the entire charade. A man working tirelessly for cash-only jobs wouldn't be spending his lunch break browsing expensive wine shops and gifting $50 bills to car washers. The lie was getting thicker, more insulting. We walked up the paved path, Ethan carrying a small box of his own tools he was lending to Randall for a supposed urgent home project. Before we could ring the bell, the massive mahogany door swung open, and Veronica appeared, radiating a forced, dazzling smile. The sight of her was the second major shock of the day. Her appearance was drastically transformed since I last saw her a month ago. She wore a tailored linen dress. The fabric alone cost more than my entire wardrobe, that hugged her figure perfectly. Her shoes were new, a high-end brand, and her handbag was a sleek designer piece. But it was her face that truly horrified me. Her hair was professionally styled with expensive, subtle highlights, and her makeup was flawless, the work of high-quality products that demanded both skill and time. As she rushed forward to embrace me, the cloud of her perfume, a fragrance I recognized from a magazine ad as being astronomically priced, nearly choked me. Eleanor, darling, what a joy, she exclaimed, her hug theatrical. You look pale. I hope the drive wasn't too much. You look magnificent, Veronica, I managed to reply, the words sticking in my throat. That dress is exquisite. Oh, this old thing, she scoffed, giving a dismissive wave. A clearance sale find from months ago. You know, you just have to be quick when those deals hit. The perfectly rehearsed, instantaneous justification. It was the exact kind of deflection the women at the store had mentioned. Every luxury was a deal, a gift, a lucky find. The sheer volume of their luck was the true indicator of the lie. We stepped inside, and the sensory evidence of their deception intensified. The entire living room had been renovated. The furniture I remembered, the slightly worn, comfortable pieces, were gone, replaced by a massive, imported leather sectional and a gleaming, modern glass coffee table. Dominating one wall was a vast, curved, flat-screen television, the kind that costs several thousands of dollars and is generally reserved for lottery winners. Dad, look who's here, Veronica called, her voice bright. Randall emerged from the kitchen, wearing the same expensive clothes he'd worn at the store, now covered by a pristine, striped apron. His smile faltered for a second when he saw me, a fleeting shadow of discomfort crossing his face, but it was quickly replaced by his usual, avuncular warmth. Eleanor, welcome. We are so glad you came. I hope you're hungry. Veronica has prepared a feast. I brought some ingredients for a shepherd's pie, I said, handing Ethan's small box of groceries to Veronica. I thought a simple home-cooked meal would be nice. Oh, how sweet, but completely unnecessary, Veronica chirped, barely looking at the box before passing it to Randall. We've got everything covered. As she spoke, I peered past her into the kitchen. The counters were a riot of color and expense. Large, choice cuts of fresh salmon, exotic vegetables, and several bottles of gourmet olive oil and imported spices. The sheer abundance and quality of the food being prepared could easily feed a small army for a week, and it was all far superior to anything I could ever afford. "Did you both prepare all this?" I asked, my voice laced with carefully masked suspicion. "We certainly did," Randall boasted. "We found an amazing bulk sale at a wholesale butcher and we couldn't let the opportunity slip away. You know how we have to save every penny. The miraculous sales. Their entire lifestyle seemed predicated on an endless series of improbable, magnificent bargains that only they ever managed to secure." Ethan, completely absorbed in the charade, was chatting happily with Veronica about his work week. His trust was so complete, so pure, that he didn't notice the expensive scent of the salmon or the gleam of the new appliances. During the lavish meal, I maintained a polite facade, but my mind was a raging storm of observations. The dinnerware was fine china, the glassware was crystal, and Randall proudly uncorked a bottle of red wine, one I instantly recognized from George's grocery store as costing over $70. "This wine is incredible." "Randall," I noted, watching him closely. "A special vintage?" "Ah, this one's a story," he said, beaming. "A friend of mine, a wine importer, let me have this case at cost because of a slight label misprint. Normally, we could never afford this, but you seize these moments, right? A friend, at cost. A misprint. Every luxury had a perfectly constructed, convenient alibi." While we ate, Veronica's phone, a brand new model, was a constant source of distraction. She kept glancing at it, typing quick, satisfied replies with a smug little smile. "Everything all right with your friend's plans, dear?" I inquired, keeping my tone light. "Oh, just some girls planning a spa weekend next month," she dismissed quickly, tucking the phone away. "Nothing important." Her eagerness to hide the conversation was palpable. After the main course, Randall offered to show me the improvements they'd made. We walked through the house, and every room revealed a new layer of the lie. Fresh wallpaper, expensive imported throw rugs, and a gleaming, professional-grade espresso machine in the kitchen. In the master bedroom, on a newly lacquered dresser, sat a stack of shopping bags. They were from high-end jewelers and designer clothing stores, some still sealed. I could just make out the receipt from the jewelry store, a 4-figure number for a piece Ethan definitely had not bought her. "My goodness, Veronica has been busy," I said, gesturing toward the bags. "Yes, well," Randall chuckled nervously. "Another fantastic clearance sale this week, Eleanor. Sometimes you have to buy things when they're marked down, even if you don't need them immediately. It's an investment." The absurdity was breathtaking. A family claiming to be unable to afford rent was investing in impulse luxury items because of a sale. Just as we returned to the living room, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It was a text message from George, the cashier. He had managed to find my number. The message was simply a photo of a receipt. It was a detailed grocery receipt dated 2 days prior. The total was $432.50. The list included prime rib, imported champagne, Alaskan crab legs, and gourmet chocolates. The name at the top, Randall Williams. Below the image, George had typed a simple, devastating message. "Mrs. Vance, I'm so sorry. I thought you needed to see the proof. This amount is normal for them." My heart stopped, then began a frantic, painful rhythm. The final, indisputable piece of evidence. For $30.50 in luxury goods, purchased 48 hours after Veronica had convinced Ethan to send $500 for a supposed power bill disconnection threat. I quickly slipped the phone into my pocket, praying the shock on my face wasn't visible. I looked at Ethan, still smiling, still happy, utterly blind to the elaborate theatrical performance surrounding him. "Are you all right, Mom?" Ethan asked, noticing my sudden stillness. "You look drained. Just a little tired, dear." I lied again, the weight of the undeniable truth nearly crushing me. The time for observation was over. The time for silence was ending. I had the weapon. The dinner ended with a flurry of overly cheerful goodbyes. As we drove away, the silence in Ethan's car was no longer just the tension of a long day. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a truth I could not yet speak. My son was driving toward the illusion of his secure life, and I was holding the sledgehammer that would shatter it. I knew the confrontation had to be handled with extreme care. Ethan's trust in Veronica was a massive emotional fortress, built not just on love, but on his deep-seated desire to be a good, supportive husband. Any immediate, furious accusation would be met with denial and a counterattack, the classic defense of the manipulator. When we arrived at my small, quiet apartment, Ethan was already on the defensive, sensing my change in mood. He helped me carry my minimal groceries, then sat down heavily on my worn sofa. "Mom," he muttered, running a shaky hand through his hair. "I feel like you were judging them back there. They are good people. They're trying their best. All those nice things were from sales and gifts. You can't just assume they're spending all their money on luxuries." His words were a direct echo of Randall's and Veronica's excuses. They had created a perfect rationalized narrative for him to believe. "Ethan, listen to me," I said, my voice low and steady, trying to cut through his emotional defense. "You said yourself Randall had to cut his consulting hours. Veronica says they're struggling to pay the power bill. But their living room looks like a luxury showroom, and Veronica is wearing thousands of dollars of clothing and jewelry. Doesn't that glaring discrepancy trouble you?" "It's not a discrepancy, Mom," he argued, his volume rising. "It's resourcefulness. Veronica is brilliant at finding a bargain. And yes, Randall works hard. Maybe he got a bonus this month. You have to believe your wife when she tells you things." "Have you seen a receipt for any of these miracle sales, son?" I pressed, leaning forward, holding his gaze. "Have you ever seen the contract for Randall's weekend consulting? Or have you simply taken their word for it because they are family?" The question landed with brutal precision. Ethan's hands clenched into fists on his knees. He refused to look at me. "Why are you doing this, Mom? You're painting my wife and her parents as con artists. That's a disgusting accusation." "I am not accusing, Ethan. I am observing," I corrected softly. "I am a mother who sees her son exhausted, stressed, working double shifts for people who are, at the very same moment, spending money like water on pure self-indulgence. I am terrified that your kindness is being systematically drained." He stood up abruptly, pacing my small living room. "I trust Veronica. That's what marriage is. You are destroying my trust in her with baseless suspicions and gossip." I knew any further pushing would only cement his resistance. The fear of being wrong about the woman he loved was stronger than his fear of financial ruin. "Fine, Ethan," I conceded. "I will say no more. Just promise me you will think about what I've said. Look at the facts, not just the emotions." His farewell hug was tight, but cold, and he left my apartment in a cloud of confused anger. He was furious at me for suggesting the possibility of betrayal, but underneath, I could see the faint tremor of doubt I had finally managed to plant. That night, I sat alone. The only sound the nervous tap-tap-tap of my fingers on the wooden armrest of my armchair. I needed to move beyond suspicion and observation. I had George's photograph of the $432 receipt, but that could be dismissed as a one-off purchase, an anomaly. Ethan needed a mountain of evidence, irrefutable, undeniable, that would force him to choose between the facts and the fantasy. I looked at the receipt photo again. Prime rib, champagne, crab legs. While I had been counting out my $38 for budget ground beef and a single onion, they were feasting like kings. The emotional manipulation, the feigned crises, the tearful phone calls, was what truly fueled my outrage. They hadn't just taken money. They had taken my son's peace of mind and my own sacrificial love. My investigation had to be surgical and relentless. I decided to leverage the few external contacts I had. First, I reached out to George, the cashier. He had been brave enough to send the receipt. He might be willing to share more. The next morning, I called the superstore and asked to speak to him. He was guarded at first, worried about his job, but the sincerity of my heartbreak convinced him. He explained that Randall and Veronica were not just occasional big spenders. They were weekly fixtures, routinely spending hundreds on products he knew my son's modest income could never sustain. They joke about how your son is their personal ATM. Mrs. Vance, George confessed, his voice heavy with distaste. They brag about the money he sends and how easy it is to convince him. That detail, the bragging, turned my pain into a searing, white-hot determination. They weren't just taking money. They were mocking his generosity. George sent me 2 more damning pieces of evidence over the next few days. 2 more receipts. One for $6.15, dated on a Monday when Veronica had told Ethan she needed emergency funds for a supposed plumbing disaster. The purchases included 2 $150 bottles of high-end scotch and a selection of imported cheeses. The lie was not only constant, it was escalating. Next, I found the phone number for Agnes, the woman I had overheard gossiping at the dumpster. I introduced myself, carefully explaining that I was Ethan's mother and needed to verify some concerning details. Agnes, who felt a genuine sense of moral outrage over the hypocrisy, was eager to talk. Agnes confirmed the constant flow of expensive delivery trucks, not just groceries, but furniture, electronics, and clothing, to Randall's house. She told me about a lavish backyard party Randall had thrown, a birthday celebration estimated by attendees to have cost several $1,000s for catering and entertainment alone. They talk about poverty to the church group. Eleanor, Agnes said, her voice filled with righteous indignation. But they are living a lie. They are parasites, and your son is their host. Every new piece of information was like a fresh wound, but it was exactly what I needed. I had a timeline of lies, receipts for high-end booze and food on the same days Ethan was being told they couldn't afford necessities. I had independent witnesses confirming their continuous pattern of deception and luxury spending. I now held a dossier of betrayal, but still I waited. I needed the right trigger, the right moment when Ethan's emotional shield was down, to deploy this evidence in a way that would be impossible to dismiss as my meddling. The turning point arrived on a Friday evening, 4 days after my visit to Randall's house. Ethan came to my apartment unannounced, his face a landscape of deep fatigue and raw stress. He collapsed onto the sofa, shoulders slumped, utterly defeated. "Mom," he muttered, running a shaky hand through his hair. "I can't do this anymore. I'm drowning." "What is it, dear?" I asked, my heart aching for the pure, unadulterated weariness in his voice. "It's Veronica. She called earlier. It's Randall again. A sudden medical emergency. He needs an emergency wisdom tooth extraction. The insurance won't cover the full specialist cost, and they need $800 by Monday." He closed his eyes, his breathing ragged. I had to commit to working all weekend, 2 16-hour shifts to make up the difference. $800 for an emergency dental procedure. The lie was not only constant, it was getting more brazen, more demanding, feeding on his exhaustion. I pictured the $650 receipt from 2 days ago, featuring scotch and specialty cheeses, and the rage inside me boiled over. This was the moment. I would not allow my son to sacrifice his health and sanity for another fabricated crisis. I sat next to him, taking his hand, my grip firm. "Ethan, look at me." He slowly opened his eyes, met my gaze, and saw the absolute, unshakable certainty in mine. "I love you, and because I love you, I need you to know the truth about the people you are sacrificing yourself for." I pulled out my phone. The first piece of evidence I presented was the original receipt George had sent, the $432.50 for prime rib and champagne, purchased on the day they claimed to be struggling with the power bill. Ethan stared at the screen. His eyes, initially clouded with tiredness, snapped into sharp focus. "What is this? Where did you get this?" His voice was a flat, disbelieving whisper. Before he could fall back on denial, I swiped to the next image. The $615 receipt, dated the same day Veronica claimed a plumbing disaster. "This is from the local superstore, Ethan. All high-end goods. Champagne, $150 scotch, gourmet seafood. They are not struggling. They are luxuriating on the money you send them." His face went slack, the color draining from it. The shock was profound. No, Mom, no, this has to be a mistake. Maybe they were buying it for someone else. A gift. Gifts while begging for money to save Randall's life? No, son, I insisted, my voice ringing with conviction. I then told him everything. George's confession, the overheard conversations at the dumpsters about Veronica's designer clothes and Randall's excessive tipping, the overwhelming evidence of their continuous, wealthy lifestyle. The car they drive is a brand new luxury sedan, Ethan. Not the minivan you think. Randall tips strangers $50 bills. Veronica is planning a spa weekend while you work triple shifts to save $800 for a phantom toothache. He finally stood up, moving away from me as if a physical barrier had been breached. He started pacing, his hands running through his hair in agitated frustration. The fortress of his trust was cracking, the emotional foundation crumbling under the weight of concrete, photographic evidence. But why? He finally asked, his voice cracking, the deep betrayal already settling into his soul. Why would Veronica lie to me about something so monumental? We're married. Because, my precious boy, it worked, I replied, the truth brutal and necessary. You are kind. You are loyal. And you are a generous man who always keeps his word. For them, you are not a partner. You are a reliable, guilt-driven source of income, a resource to be exploited to maintain a lifestyle they cannot afford on their own. Tears welled up in his eyes, not of sadness, but of deep, searing humiliation. The reality that his purest intentions had been used as a weapon against him was shattering. How much, Mom? How much have I given them in total? Based on the emergencies you've told me about over the last 2 years, including the funds I added, I estimate you've sent them well over $10,000, I stated. The number a cold, hard anchor dropped into the storm. $10,000 you could have used for a down payment on a house, for your own retirement, for your own needs. The number hit him like a physical blow. $10,000. Years of his life, his sacrifice, gone. Stolen not by a stranger, but by the woman who slept beside him. I need to go home, he said, his voice now flat, devoid of emotion, yet ringing with a newfound terrifying stillness. I need to talk to Veronica. I need to face her with this. I need to see her explanation. Are you ready for that conversation, Ethan? I asked, my voice filled with a mother's caution. This information is a one-way ticket. Once it's on the table, your marriage, regardless of the outcome, is over. The trust is fatally broken. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the floor, then at the wall, then back at the receipts on my phone. He wasn't just looking at the money. He was staring at the wreck of his future. I need the truth, Mom. No matter how much it hurts, he said, finally lifting his head. His eyes were red, but the indecision was gone, replaced by a terrible, clear resolve. Thank you for having the courage to show me this. You saved me. I pulled him into a desperate, tight hug. The tears that fell were mine, tears for the pain my honorable son was about to endure. He was no longer the naive boy I saw just hours ago. He was a man, standing on the precipice of his own broken heart, but prepared to fight for his self-worth. What will you do, Ethan? I'm going home to talk to my wife, he repeated, his voice now steel. And depending on her answer, I'm going to make the most important decision of my life. I will not be a victim anymore. He left my apartment just after 9 p.m. I sat up all night, unable to sleep, staring at the darkened window, listening to the silence, praying for the sound of my phone. The fate of my son's marriage and his happiness was being decided right now behind closed doors, in a painful, inevitable collision with the truth. The clock on my wall ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2 in the morning. Each second was a lead weight on my chest. I imagined the scene at Ethan and Veronica's house. The shock, the denial, the eventual brutal confrontation. I feared not just for Ethan's safety, but for the complete emotional collapse I knew was imminent. At 2:47 a.m., my phone finally rang. It was Ethan. I snatched it up on the first ring, my voice shaky. Ethan, what happened? His voice, when it came, was unrecognizable. It was a raw mix of pain, deep-seated anger, and a chilling final sense of clarity. Mom, you were right. Completely, horrifyingly right. It's worse than we thought. Tell me, son. Slowly. When I got home, I didn't confront her immediately. I went straight to the closet. Something told me I needed more than just the receipts. His voice was hollow, recounting the violation of his own trust. I looked through her things, something I'd never once considered doing. In her most expensive handbag, tucked deep into a side pocket, I found a small, leather-bound notebook. He paused, taking a ragged breath. That notebook, Mom, it was a ledger. A detailed, professional financial record of every lie. Every single time she called me with an emergency. Every dollar she requested. Every fabricated story. It was all documented there. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just lying. This was systematic, calculated fraud. A ledger? What else did it say? She had columns for the date, the lie used, Randall's urgent meds, plumbing failure, and the target amount. But that's not the worst part. There were future notes. She had detailed plans for the next 3 crises. A fabricated $2,500 emergency surgery for her mother, and a note to herself on how to make me feel guilty if I asked too many questions about the money. The cold-blooded, mechanical nature of the deception was sickening. They weren't just opportunists. They were professional con artists who had meticulously documented the exploitation of my son's heart. Did you confront her with it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Yes. I walked into the living room, threw the ledger onto the coffee table, and then showed her the photos of the receipts on my phone. At first, she tried to deny everything, claiming the notebook was just household budgeting and that the receipts were gifts from her family. And then, when I stood my ground, she changed tactics. She became the victim. She started screaming, accusing me of betraying her trust, saying I was spying on her. And then, Mom, she blamed you. She screamed that you had always been a meddling, jealous mother-in-law who was trying to destroy our perfect marriage. The familiar sound of the manipulator trying to flip the script. It was infuriating, yet predictable. I know, son. That's what they do when they're trapped. But the most shocking part was when she finally admitted it. She suddenly stopped yelling, looked me in the eye, and confessed everything. She said her family had never been poor. Randall's job is secure. She said the entire financial crisis narrative was a strategy to maintain their lifestyle and get ahead. She used the word strategy? Yes, Mom. And then she said I was simply too easy to convince, and that my family had enough money that we could afford to share. As if my money was communal property for their personal use. His voice was raw with incredulous fury. I asked him about Randall. I called him. I put him on speakerphone and told him I knew everything. He tried to deny it, but when Veronica confirmed it, he just sighed and said, "It was just business, Ethan. Nothing personal. We just saw an opportunity. Just business." The cold, detached indifference of that statement was a deeper cut than any insult. They had never seen Ethan as a person, only as a mark. What did Veronica do when her father said that? Ethan laughed, a short, bitter sound devoid of humor. She got furious at him for confessing. She wasn't mad that she hurt me. She was furious that he had ruined her ability to keep the scam going. That's when I finally saw her. The real her. A ruthless, self-centered predator. The conversation lasted until dawn. Ethan told me about hidden assets his lawyers would need to uncover, about other high-end purchases he'd dismissed as gifts, and about the absolute, devastating realization that the woman he loved had been a meticulously crafted lie for 2 years. The money is the least of it. Mom, he confessed, his voice thick with emotion, the money hurts. But the realization that I spent 2 years of my life with a stranger, that my every act of love was a deposit into her scam account, that's what truly broke me. And what is your decision, my dear son? I told her to leave. I told her the marriage is over tonight. There is no way back from this kind of systematic, cold-blooded betrayal. I am calling a divorce lawyer first thing this morning. I will not give them another cent. The phone call ended with a moment of profound, shared silence. Ethan had lost his marriage, his money, and a piece of his innocent trust. But he had found something far more valuable: his self-respect and the blinding clarity of truth. He was no longer the victim. I hung up the phone and watched the first pale light of the morning creep through my window. I hadn't saved my son's marriage, but I had saved his life, his future, and his very soul from the depths of ruthless exploitation. The pain was immense, but the victory of truth was definitive. The next phase, the legal fight and the rebuilding, would be just as hard, but he would face it now with his eyes wide open. The days that followed were a blur of cold, legal finality. Ethan temporarily moved into a small, furnished corporate apartment near his office, a necessary retreat to process the immediate, crushing aftermath of the confrontation. My role shifted from detective to anchor, a steady, non-judgmental presence in the middle of his emotional storm. The divorce proceedings, initiated the very next day, were a brutal, forensic dissection of the marriage. Ethan's lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Mrs. Davies, immediately focused on the discovery of the infamous ledger. That small, leather-bound notebook was the key, turning a complicated divorce into a clear case of financial fraud and systematic deception. The ledger confirmed the extent of the betrayal was far greater than my initial estimate. Mrs. Davies calculated that, over the course of their 3-year relationship, not just the marriage, Ethan had been manipulated into sending Veronica and her family over $18,000. The money was meticulously accounted for in the ledger, labeled as investment in lifestyle. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Davies explained during one meeting, her voice tight with professional anger. This is not just poor communication. This is a clear, continuous pattern of fraud. They didn't just spend the money. They used your belief in them to fund their reality. The divorce process also exposed Veronica's own hidden assets. She had a secret savings account where she had been depositing a portion of the money siphoned from Ethan, alongside jewelry and designer accessories purchased with his emergency funds. She had maintained an artificial facade of financial need, all while quietly building a portfolio of hidden wealth. Ethan would come to me every evening, exhausted and hollow-eyed, to recount the day's revelations. She told the lawyer mom that she deserved the money because I had a better quality of life than her. She felt entitled to my paycheck simply because I earned it, he told me one night, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. The sheer arrogance of the entitlement was what truly galled us. They saw his diligence and kindness as a flaw, a weakness to be exploited, rather than a virtue to be cherished. My own confrontation with Randall was inevitable. He called my number repeatedly, his voice shifting from blustering denial to desperate, oily pleading. I finally answered him one afternoon, knowing it would be the last time. "Eleanor, please," he whined, the former confidence completely gone, replaced by the sound of a trapped rat. "You can talk to Ethan. We'll pay back every cent. We'll sign an agreement. We just can't handle the scandal. Please, just make him stop the divorce." "Randall," I said, my voice calm, steady, and utterly cold. "You had 3 years to be honest with my son. You chose lies. You chose to exploit his heart, and you chose to document that exploitation in a little leather book. The time for deals is over. It was just a mistake." "We were struggling," he insisted, clinging to the old, tattered lie. "No, Randall. Your receipts for $150 scotch and the ledger with future scam plans confirm it was not a mistake. It was a calculated strategy. You have to live with the consequences of that choice now." I hung up the phone before he could speak another word. The silence that followed felt like a powerful, cleansing victory. Veronica made her own last-ditch attempt at manipulation. She showed up at my apartment one sunny Tuesday afternoon, dressed in deliberately humble, simple clothing, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, the image of the repentant, vulnerable wife. "Adeline," she said, using my old name, tears instantly welling up. "I know we made mistakes, but I truly loved Ethan. It just spiraled out of control. We never meant to hurt him." I stared at her, unmoving. The tears were too immediate, too perfect. I had seen this act too many times. "Veronica," I replied, my voice measured. "Real love does not require a detailed, written strategy of lies and manipulation. What you did was not love. It was exploitation disguised as affection. She tried every tactic: the contrite victim, the desperate wife, the daughter-in-law seeking familial peace. I let her speak, observing the performance with a chilling detachment. "The $18,000 you took from my son wasn't just money," I finally explained. "It was his trust. It was his ability to believe in the goodness of people. It was his future down payment that cannot be repaid with forced tears and hollow apologies." When she realized her performance was failing, her true nature, the one Ethan had glimpsed at 2 a.m., flared up. Her face twisted with cold fury. "I always knew you were the problem, Eleanor. Ethan would have been happy if you hadn't meddled." "Perhaps," I replied, feeling a surge of calm, righteous defiance. "But he would have been happy while being bled dry. I prefer him temporarily unhappy, but free, than happily used. His freedom is worth the cost of your anger." After that final, brutal confrontation, she left, slamming my apartment door behind her. I never heard from Veronica or her parents again. Agnes later informed me that Randall's family had quietly sold their luxurious home and moved out of the neighborhood, likely fleeing the shame and the judgment of their former neighbors. The parasites had been forced to seek a new host. Ethan's healing was a slow, arduous climb. The scars of the ledger ran deep. He was angry at himself for being so trusting, so naive. But slowly, with my unwavering support and Mrs. Davies's professionalism, he began the hard work of rebuilding his life and his self-worth. He was determined to emerge from the betrayal not as a cynical victim, but as a wiser, stronger man. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the confrontation, granting Ethan a clean break. He received none of the money back. Veronica had been too effective at moving or hiding the funds. But the legal closure was more valuable than any dollar amount. He had his freedom. The immediate financial impact was severe. Ethan had to downsize, moving from his comfortable house to the small corporate apartment. But the emotional void was the hardest to fill. He struggled with an agonizing question. Could he ever trust anyone again? He would call me late at night, his voice thick with fear and doubt. "Mom, how do I know? How do I tell the difference between kindness and a scam?" Veronica played the part of the devoted wife perfectly. How can I be sure the next person I meet doesn't have a ledger in their handbag? These late-night calls were the new battlefield. I didn't offer easy answers. I offered the wisdom of hard-won experience. Trust isn't blindness, Ethan. It's an investment that must be earned. The next time, you don't start with 100%. You start with 10%, and the other 90% is built on proven consistency, transparency, and action that matches the word. He began what he called his verification system. It wasn't born of cynicism, but of self-preservation. Before committing to any significant financial help, even to friends or colleagues, he would ask for documentation, speak to multiple sources, and take time to evaluate the consistency of the story. I initially worried that this system might turn him into a cold, distrustful man. But I was wrong. It simply allowed him to align his vast capacity for generosity with a necessary practical wisdom. He no longer gave out of emotional impulse or guilt. He gave out of informed choice. This new approach was tested when a longtime coworker, Marcus, approached him with a tearful story about a critically ill parent needing immediate, costly transportation to a specialist clinic. The story was compelling, and the initial old Ethan would have written a check immediately. But the new Ethan paused. "Marcus," he said gently, "I want to help. But before I do, can you send me the name of the clinic and the transport quote? My mother has experience with medical claims, and I want to make sure you're getting the best price." Marcus instantly bristled, growing agitated. "You don't trust me, Ethan? After all these years?" "It's not about trust, Marcus," Ethan replied, reciting my own words. "It's about being wise with my resources. I need to make sure my money goes exactly where you say it's going." Marcus quickly backed down, saying he'd send the documents later. He never did. A week later, Ethan learned that Marcus had been heavily involved in high-stakes online gambling and had been soliciting funds from multiple people across the office. Ethan told me the story over dinner, a mixture of triumph and sorrow in his eyes. 2 years ago, Mom, I would have lost $1,000 to that lie. Now I understand. Verifying isn't distrusting. It's protecting the very generosity that they seek to exploit. For my part, I also began to heal from my own deep-seated guilt. For months, I tortured myself, wondering if I should have intervened sooner, saved him more money. But I finally understood my own timing was correct. I had acted when the evidence was irrefutable, forcing the issue only when Ethan could not rationalize his way out. Any earlier, and he would have simply pushed me away, clinging tighter to the lie. With the financial bleeding stopped, Ethan was able to start rebuilding his own life. The money he no longer sent to Veronica's family was now channeled into a dedicated savings account. He started investing in his career and his future, creating the stability that had been stolen from him. He also began to care for me in a way he hadn't before. He insisted on replacing my worn-out washing machine, a purchase I had put off for 5 years. He started visiting more often, always bringing high-quality groceries that we could cook together. "It's ironic, Mom," he reflected one day, peeling potatoes in my small kitchen. "All that time, I was working myself sick to support a family of frauds, while you, who truly deserved my help and support, never once asked for a single thing." His observation brought tears to my eyes. During the years of Veronica's reign, I had silently endured my own small struggles, refusing to add any pressure to the burden he already carried. Now, his quiet care was my reward. My relationship with George, the brave cashier, also flourished. He and his kind wife, Marlene, came over for tea one afternoon. George was a quiet, principled man who deeply regretted his inability to save his own mother from a similar scheme years ago. "You know, Eleanor," he said, stirring his tea, "what I admire most is how you handled the truth. Most people would have caused a scene, but you simply presented the facts and allowed the truth to do its difficult, heartbreaking work." His words made me realize the most profound lesson of all. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it is the quiet, firm decision to speak the truth when it is hardest to hear. The truth had cost my son his marriage, but it had purchased his freedom. Ethan's journey through freedom was not linear. The initial burst of clarity was often followed by deep, isolating periods of grief. He didn't grieve the loss of Veronica. He grieved the loss of the idea of Veronica, the lie she had perfectly embodied. The most difficult hurdle was the sense of profound, personal humiliation. "How could I have been so blind, Mom?" he would ask, his voice thick with self-contempt. "I'm a sharp man at the office. I manage complex accounts. But I let myself be played by a woman and her father who had a cheap, $2 notebook filled with lies." I had to gently remind him that his vulnerability was not a weakness, but a profound strength that had been twisted. "Your goodness was your shield, Ethan, not your flaw. Only people with genuine kindness can be exploited in this way. They preyed on your virtue. Their cold calculation is the flaw, not your generous heart." Over time, the shame began to recede, replaced by a growing pride in his resilience. He started dedicating his newfound free time not just to saving, but to small, enriching activities, taking painting classes, joining a hiking club, and re-establishing genuine, reciprocal relationships with old friends who truly valued him. His professional life also saw a resurgence. With the constant financial stress gone, his focus sharpened. He received a long-overdue promotion, which he saw not just as a raise, but as a symbolic recovery of the money that had been stolen. "I earned this, Mom," he told me, holding the promotion letter. "This is real money earned by my honest work, not money gained by someone else's tears and manufactured emergencies." The painful process of setting boundaries became a cornerstone of his new life. He realized that a good boundary wasn't a wall to keep everyone out, but a fence to help him discern who was worthy of entry. This was vividly illustrated when his aunt, a distant relative with a history of financial woes, called him. She launched into a long, rambling story about a necessary operation for her pet and a sudden deficit in her budget. The old Ethan would have sighed and sent a few $100s out of obligation. The new Ethan listened politely and responded with professional detachment. Aunt Grace, he said, I hear your struggle. Before I can commit, could you send me the name of the clinic and the transport quote? My mother has experience with medical claims, and I want to make sure you're getting the best price. Aunt Grace immediately bristled, accusing him of callousness. When Ethan gently held his ground, she hung up, and he never heard the pet emergency mentioned again. It's astonishing, Mom, he commented. The moment you demand transparency, the fraudsters retreat. They don't want help. They want blind compliance. My own relationship with Ethan deepened to an intimacy we hadn't shared since he was a child. We spent our Sundays together, often walking in the park, talking not about finances, but about life, values, and the true meaning of family. A mother's job isn't just to love, but to protect. Even when that protection means destroying a comforting illusion, I told him one afternoon, watching him laugh freely for the first time in months. I had to protect your integrity, Ethan. Your ability to love and trust needed a defense system. He stopped walking and hugged me, a long, heartfelt embrace that conveyed more than words ever could. You gave me the greatest gift, Mom. You gave me the courage to choose the painful truth over the easy lie. He was no longer a naive checkbook. He was a wise steward of his own life. 2 years after the day George the cashier whispered his truth, Ethan's life had stabilized into a pattern of quiet, determined rebuilding. He had paid off the debts accrued from his generosity and had established a comfortable, intentional life. The ghost of Veronica was finally receding. The universe, it seems, rewards sincerity. Ethan found a new light in his life, a woman named Clara. She was a systems analyst at his company, a woman defined by her effortless transparency and grounded nature. Clara was the antithesis of Veronica. She drove a sensible 6-year-old car, preferred cooking at home to expensive restaurants, and spoke of her financial goals with refreshing honesty. What truly impressed me, however, was her respect for my relationship with Ethan. The first time Ethan brought her to my small apartment for dinner, Clara brought the ingredients and insisted we cook together. Eleanor, she said without pretense, chopping vegetables with a practiced, steady hand, I want you to know something. I have a stable job and I am completely self-sufficient. I will never, ever ask you or Ethan for money. Her words, so simple and direct, unexpectedly brought tears to my eyes. It was a profound statement of genuine character, a recognition of the emotional trauma we had endured. I realized how deeply traumatized I had been, that such a basic promise of honesty could move me so profoundly. Clara's presence in Ethan's life was a gentle, healing balm. She respected his new boundaries, sometimes even reinforcing them. When a friend tried to pressure Ethan into a high-risk investment, Clara was the one who quietly advised him to wait for the proper documentation. The contrast with the past was startling. Clara and Ethan were partners, not predator and prey. They discussed their future not in terms of what Ethan could provide, but what they could build together. My bond with George and Marlene also solidified into a genuine, life-affirming friendship. We met weekly for coffee, a small, trusting circle that valued integrity above all else. George, who had suffered so much quiet regret, found a profound sense of purpose in our story. You know, Eleanor, George said one morning, I still work that register. And I see people like Randall and Veronica every day. But now, when I see a struggling person like you, I know the power of a single word. My silence destroyed my mother. My decision to speak saved your son. His words encapsulated the high moral stakes of my intervention. It wasn't about saving $18,000. It was about saving a person from a corrosive, soul-destroying deception. Ethan proposed to Clara in a small ceremony in the park where we often walked. It was a quiet, intimate proposal, centered on a shared promise of honesty and mutual respect, not grand gestures and material wealth. Before the engagement, Ethan had a serious conversation with Clara, laying bare the entire ugly history of his previous marriage, the lies, the ledger. The $18,000 Clara's reaction was not one of judgment, but of deep empathy. Ethan, she said, I don't see a fool. I see an honorable man whose kindness was criminally exploited. I am proud that you found the courage to expose that lie. You showed me your darkness, and I love you for the light you brought back. Her acceptance of his painful past was the final piece of his emotional recovery. He realized that a good, honest person will never exploit a vulnerable history. They will embrace it as a measure of the person's strength. Ethan and Clara married 6 months later. It was a small, joyful ceremony. No excessive spending, no extravagant displays. It was a wedding built on substance, not spectacle. I stood proudly by my son's side, watching him exchange vows with a woman whose eyes held genuine, transparent love. During the reception, Ethan gave a short, poignant toast. He spoke about the journey to true partnership. I learned the hardest lesson of my life, he said, his voice clear and resonant. The person you choose to share your life with should add to your stability, not subtract from it. They should cherish your honesty, not plot against your generosity. Clara is my stability, my truth, and my strongest boundary. His toast was a powerful public declaration of his survival. It was the moment I truly understood that the trauma had been fully processed, turned into wisdom, and cemented into the foundation of his new, joyful life. The quiet happiness of Ethan and Clara's life became a powerful testament to the value of boundaries and truth. Their home was a sanctuary, built on shared values rather than expensive illusions. Ethan often reflected on how the forced frugality of his life with Veronica had been a lie, but the intentional, joyful simplicity of his life with Clara was pure truth. He took his financial education seriously. He began volunteering at a community center, teaching a course on financial literacy and the psychological red flags of relationship scams. He called it the integrity investment. I tell people my story, Mom, he shared after one class. I show them the psychological tricks, the manufactured urgency, the victim narrative, the gaslighting. I tell them to trust their gut, but to verify with their brain. His vulnerability was his greatest teaching tool. Students who had been burned by similar schemes, friends, family members, or partners, found solace and practical advice in his personal experience. My own life also underwent a quiet transformation. Ethan, now financially stable and wise, insisted on helping me comfortably. He didn't just give me money, he treated it as a financial partnership. Mom, we're going to look at your retirement funds together, he explained one evening. We're going to create a budget that allows you to buy the new coat you need and take that small trip you always wanted. You spent your life investing in me. Now I'm investing in your peace. It was a healing dynamic. For the first time in years, I wasn't counting every single cent. I bought a warm, beautiful cashmere coat and booked a short train journey to visit an old college friend. These small luxuries were not frivolous. They were markers of stability, earned through honesty. The true nature of my relationship with Ethan was finally evident to the world. A relationship built on mutual respect and genuine care, unburdened by the toxic influence of Veronica's need. Ethan's new boundary system was continually tested, and it always held. A former college friend contacted him, claiming to be launching a groundbreaking tech startup and needed a 5-figure investment. Ethan was interested, but cautious. He requested the business plan, the pitch deck, and detailed financial projections. The friend grew angry and evasive, refusing to share proprietary information. When Ethan gently withdrew his offer, the friend immediately called him a small thinker and a cynic. I laughed, Mom, Ethan recounted. The insults were identical to the ones Veronica used when she was caught. I realized, the moment someone resorts to emotional pressure or personal insults instead of providing factual evidence, they are not seeking a partnership. They are seeking a victim. The contrast with Clara was always a potent reminder of the good that exists. Clara, a brilliant financial analyst, never once asked Ethan about his salary, but she readily shared her own financial plan and goals. Her transparency was her strength, the antidote to Veronica's secrecy. One afternoon, George came to me with a worried look. He had seen Randall back in the neighborhood, driving a different, older car and acting visibly stressed. He's been trying to talk to the neighbors, Eleanor, George said, spinning a new story about a failed business venture and a need for bridge funding. He's trying to establish a new host for his parasite routine. My initial reaction was a cold dread, but the fear quickly dissipated. "Let him try, George," I said firmly. "He can spin any tale he likes." But Ethan is no longer listening, and thanks to your courage, the neighbors in Willow Creek are also now educated. His market is gone. The years of enduring silence had been replaced by a quiet, unwavering confidence. We had not sought revenge, but the truth itself had created a shield, rendering the manipulators powerless. The greatest lesson, I reflected, was that a mother's instinct, backed by irrefutable facts, is the strongest weapon in the world. I had learned that love requires courage, and that the hardest conversations are often the most necessary. The story of the ledger and the deceit, though painful, became a quiet, powerful narrative within our community. It was a cautionary tale that sparked necessary, difficult conversations about financial boundaries in relationships. Ethan's work in the community center led to a breakthrough. A young woman named Sarah attended his integrity investment class. She approached him after one session, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, "your story is my life. My fiancé is constantly asking for money for a startup he has. He shows me glossy presentations, but when I ask for the bank statements, he accuses me of trying to sabotage his dream." Ethan, recognizing the exact chilling pattern, didn't hesitate. He sat with her, not as a friend, but as a seasoned survivor. He taught her the rules: demand transparency, check the documentation, and prioritize her own stability. Sarah followed his advice. She gently pressed her fiancé for a simple tax return document. He exploded in a familiar tirade: victimhood, betrayal, accusation. Sarah realized the truth immediately, ended the engagement, and saved her entire life savings. "You saved me from a life with a ledger, Mr. Vance," she told him later. "You gave me the language to demand the truth." The small, quiet victory confirmed the legacy of our pain. Ethan's suffering was not in vain. It was actively preventing the suffering of others. My friendship with George and Marlene continued to deepen. We had a bond forged in shared morality, a silent agreement that we would never tolerate dishonesty. George, now retired, sometimes helped me with minor errands, and our relationship was one of genuine mutual respect. One evening, while we were sharing a simple meal at my apartment, George shared a detail that finally provided the last piece of the psychological puzzle. "Eleanor, I saw Randall a few weeks ago at a different store. He was buying a bottle of very cheap rot-gut liquor, and he looked utterly defeated, not just stressed. He's probably run out of people to lie to," I speculated. "No," George shook his head. "I don't think so. I think the constant need to lie is exhausting. They were living not in wealth, but in a permanent state of performance. They had to constantly remember the story, the excuse, the emotion. That kind of fake life is a prison." His insight struck me deeply. Veronica and Randall were not just exploiting Ethan. They were prisoners of their own toxic narrative. They couldn't relax, couldn't be honest, couldn't build genuine relationships. Their life was a constant, exhausting, and ultimately unsustainable show. My son, on the other hand, was living a life of profound ease. He could relax, be open, and be honest with Clara and with me. His life, though simpler and less ostentatious than the lie he once funded, was fundamentally richer. Clara became pregnant with their first child, a revelation that filled our quiet lives with an explosion of joy. When Ethan told me the news, he didn't just tell me, he shared his fears and his profound hope. "Mom, I'm scared," he confessed. "I'm scared of raising a child in a world where people are so easily deceived. I don't want them to be cynical, but I need them to be safe." "You will teach them the most important lesson, Ethan," I promised him, placing my hand on his shoulder. "You will teach them that trust is a choice, not a given. You will teach them that honor is not a weakness, but the strongest armor they will ever possess. They will grow up in a house built on honesty." His journey from the naive husband to the wise father was the full circle of my intervention. The truth I had delivered had not just saved him, it had created a legacy of integrity for the next generation. The painful memory of the ledger was now simply a lesson. It was a reminder that the darkest corners of human nature exist, but that the light of truth, when bravely revealed, is always more powerful. I had acted not out of malice, but out of a fierce, protective love. 2.5 years had passed since the divorce. Ethan and Clara's son, Arthur, was born, a profound, immediate joy that washed away the last vestiges of the past's bitterness. Arthur's nursery was built not with expensive designer furniture, but with handmade, solid wood pieces that Ethan and Clara had lovingly restored together, a perfect symbol of their honest, intentional life. My final, definitive lesson from this entire ordeal was the understanding that a mother's ultimate duty is not to maintain comfort, but to ensure integrity. I had risked my relationship with my son, endured painful accusations, and engaged in secretive detective work, all for the preservation of his honor. I now understood that the most powerful form of justice isn't found in a courtroom, but in the restoration of a person's inner conviction. Ethan had his conviction back. He knew his worth. The wisdom he gained was a permanent fixture. He no longer needed the external evidence. His internal radar for deceit was razor sharp. He could discern the subtle, manipulative language, the hurried request, the blame shifting, the manufactured urgency in seconds. One day, while sorting through old family papers, I found an old photo of a younger Veronica smiling broadly. I looked at the picture not with hatred, but with a quiet, sad pity. She was a woman who had chosen the difficult path of the lie over the easy path of the truth, and in doing so, had forfeited all chance at genuine happiness. Her choice had been her prison. Ethan's choice to face the truth had been his liberation. My role in Arthur's life was that of the happy, respected grandmother. I was the keeper of the family's truth, the quiet protector of their foundation. I often babysat, and watching Arthur sleep, I was reminded of the enormous, frightening responsibility of parenthood. I would often think of George, the brave cashier. His single, quiet decision to speak up had set the entire chain of events into motion. He was the unsung hero, the moral compass who chose to risk his security for a stranger's well-being. I wrote George a final, heartfelt letter, thanking him not for the money he saved us, but for the moral courage he modeled. I told him his act was a testament that a single act of integrity can undo years of calculated deceit. My own life, now comfortable and peaceful, was a reward for my courage. I cherished my new cashmere coat, not for its expense, but for what it represented, the financial freedom Ethan had restored to me. I have learned that old age does not mean surrendering to quiet acceptance. It means embracing the strength of conviction, even when it is unpopular. I am Eleanor Vance, 72 years old, a woman who chose to destroy her son's marriage to save his life. And I have never regretted the choice. The legacy I leave Ethan is not a large inheritance, but the firm understanding that his kindness is a treasure, and that the only people worthy of his generosity are those who choose to live in the light of unburdened honesty. As I sit now, sipping my tea, looking at the picture of my healthy, happy family, I know I did the right thing. The truth hurts, but the lie kills. The raw, searing pain of betrayal eventually cooled into the steel of conviction. My son lost a wife, but he gained his soul, learning that true love is built on transparency, not on the fragile scaffolding of lies. If you've ever felt the cold touch of a calculated deceit, if you've ever sacrificed your own needs for a lie, remember my story. Remember that your integrity is the strongest armor you possess. Don't be afraid to demand the truth. It is the first, most vital step to freedom. Subscribe to our channel to hear more true stories where courage triumphs over calculated lies, and wisdom rebuilds what deceit destroyed.